The Prince of Thieves film from 1948, starring John Hall, does something that none of our other films in the Splitting Arrows series has done thus far. Namely, provoke the question of, is this a Robin Hood story? Certainly, Robin Hood is the character being played by John Hall. That is his name. He bears many similarities to the character that we know and love. And yet, there are many ways in which this is not the story one might expect to be told, even though it has many of the familiar trappings. It also includes elements that are unfamiliar, such as Robin Hood having foster parents that he goes to have dinner with, something not seen in most adaptations. His life in Sherwood Forest is usually depicted as being much more separated from those sorts of comforts of home and family. Now, Robin Hood stories have been told for so many years and have varied in so many different ways. I had no problem personally adjusting to the idea of this being a Robin Hood tale, but then I've been reading a whole lot of them lately, so I've seen a lot of variations. And I can really see why somebody who is mostly familiar with more modern pop culture adaptations would feel a little off-kilter by this representation. Now, when I first outlined the Splitting Arrows series of episodes, I intended to include summaries of each of the films, just a short recap of what had happened. And I recorded several iterations of it for the 1922 film, but I ended up cutting them all out. Nothing really worked. The territory just felt too familiar. But since this one is a little bit different in terms of the story it tells, enough so that it provoked this discussion of whether or not it really felt like a Robin Hood story, after we have our mid-episode break, when we come back and we're into spoiler territory, I will insert a little bit of a summary to catch you all up to speed, assuming you don't want to go out and find the film for yourselves. Welcome back for a very special episode of Splitting Arrows. Special because this is the first episode of the podcast that is recorded with all of the guests in the same room together. We are just all speaking into a single mic. Patreon.com/Into Greenwood if you want to help us get better equipment. So joining me today for this episode of Splitting Arrows is again Richard Hopkins-Lutz.
Hello.
Also, for the first time, two guests, Roger Papke, my father Roger, and my brother Theo Papke.
Hi.
That's right. It's a very family podcast, and while it hasn't come up before, the frequent contributor here, Richard Hopkins-Lutz, is also my brother-in-law, married to my sister Marianne. Now, today's film is going to be the one and only Prince of Thieves. And by one and only, I mean one of two Prince of Thieves. This is not the better-known Kevin Costner Prince of Thieves from 1991. Oh no. This is the movie The Prince of Thieves from 1948. Now, this film came about because the screenwriter, Charles Sheener, came across this book, The Prince of Thieves, in a list of works by Alexandre Dumas, better known as the writer of such works as The Three Musketeers, and he suggested it to his collaborator, Sam Katzman, who is a producer in Hollywood. Katzman was especially known for making film adaptations of public domain works. Sheener wanted to just use the title and create their own story, but Katzman insisted that they actually do this whole adaptation based on the English translation he found of Alexandre Dumas' book. This English translation was made in 1904 by Alfred Allinson, and it was of
two books, The Prince of Thieves and Robin Hood the Outlaw, which were two books published posthumously in 1872 and 1873. They came out right after Dumas had died. However, Dumas did not originate these stories. Not just in that he didn't originate the character of Robin Hood, but Dumas' work was an adaptation of a novel that came out in 1840 that was the collected serialized story by an English writer, Pierce Egan the Younger. So that means this film is inspired by the English translation of a French adaptation of an English novel. Yeah. I'm looking forward to this. The film will star John Hall as Robin Hood. Looking up some information about John Hall, I found out that he is the son of Felix Lochet, who is also a known actor, but Felix Lochet did not get his start in acting until he was 73 years old. He was visiting his son on the set of a film. The director saw him, liked him, wanted to cast him in the film, and this launched a 16-year-long career that led to guest starring roles in all sorts of popular shows from the time, including Star Trek, Man from U.N.C.L.E., Gunsmoke, all sorts of works. John Hall and his father were both inventors. Felix invented a mapping system. John Hall invented an underwater camera and has a patent for the hull design for PT boats. The film also stars Patricia Morrison, Adele Jurgens, Alan Mowbray, Michael Duane, H.B. Warner, Robin Raymond, Lowell Gilmore, and Belle Mitchell, as well as Walter Sand as Little John, although he's listed as uncredited for some reason. So, with all of that information, what are you all expecting out of this film? 1948's Prince of Thieves, which came out just 2 years after The Bandit of Sherwood Forest, which, as Rick can tell you, was not the highlight of the Splitting Arrows series.
It was not. I'm hopeful that this one will be a more enjoyable movie, though given that I have heard nothing of it before Thaddeus came to me with this, it was rather tough to find a good copy of. Mm-hmm. You end up finding a copy of it in a DVD collection of movies. Mm-hmm. None of these usually speak well to the caliber of film, but I always, I don't know. I'm willing to give it a shot. Some of my favorite films have come off of like $1 DVDs. The Leslie Howard Scarlet Pimpernel, for instance, being.
Oh, that's a great film.
Yeah, but that film is really very, very well acclaimed and very well known, broadly presented in many venues. In terms of this particular movie, I hope it remediates the entire Robin Hood series after the thief, the Bandit of Sherwood embarrassed it so much. But again, I don't have terribly high hopes because I know that it's a very popular theme that people try to exploit, and that the stars of this movie have not made, except as you're talking about the father being a good bit player and more modern things, have not really placed their star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. So I'm optimistic, but not too hopeful.
Our star of this film, John Hall, does actually have 2 stars. One for movies and one for television. Yeah. He was a relatively, not a huge star in Hollywood, obviously, but reasonably well-known, good working actor for a long time. His major breakout role was in the film Hurricane.
But that was much later?
No, much earlier.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In the 30s.
Oh. Of all the names and topics that came up in our introduction, the name Dumas, of course, stuck out to me the most. I'm far younger and don't know any of these other actors,
How old do you think we are that we would know these actors from being around from their work in the 1940s?
You act like you're surrounded by a bunch of graybeards.
Yeah, I'm seeing graybeards. I'm seeing a lot of graybeards.
Okay, that's true, to be fair.
Also, I read the unabridged Count of Monte Cristo, and so I thoroughly enjoyed it. I don't know. I've got kind of high expectations. I'm hoping for a diamond in the rough.
That's what I'm hoping for. Like, I'm hoping that it's, because like I said, just because it didn't get lasting acclaim doesn't mean it's not a fun, good movie. And I like popcorn flicks as much as anybody. I like a movie that's fun.
I wish I had higher expectations. We went into The Bandit of Sherwood Forest saying the exact same thing. Oh, might not be the best film ever, but probably will be a decent, good, action-y flick. And it wasn't.
He was honestly boring at times, but...
And offensive at others.
And actually offensive at others.
Yes, so I'm hoping it's at least not offensive.
Yes.
That's the bar was set so low by the previous film. This one will not have to work too hard to clear it. And I'm certainly not expecting it to rise to the standards of our earliest, better remembered works by Douglas Fairbanks and Errol Flynn.
I hope that it does not at any point make me want to turn it off.
We've all sworn to stick through it, so here we are.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are bound by oath and bound by blood.
Yes, by blood, family,
All right.
And our listeners will never know otherwise.
This is true.
The title, of course, is still going to, of course, make me think of the Kevin Costner film that...
Yeah, I hope it opens with the Bryan Adams theme. Just somehow.
Yeah.
If I don't see any flaming arrows landing on peasant houses...
If Morgan Freeman doesn't make an appearance...
But I mean, it should have Alan Rickman as a villain, either way.
I sound like you're all anticipating that terrible costume.
I kind of am. I'm looking forward to listening to that episode.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to rewatching that. I hope that'll help me out for that episode.
It's still going to be a while till we get to this one, but this will certainly invite comparisons just because of the name. I was totally unfamiliar with this film before starting this project. I was unfamiliar with the book on which it is based. I have read it now. I've read the first one of the Alexandre Dumas kind of duet of books, the one on which this film is based. So I have some expectations of what we'll be seeing. I don't have high expectations that we'll follow the book very closely, especially after reading how the screenwriter initially wanted to do totally his own story anyway. One thing I will note about reading the book that I thought was very odd was that it was not until the very final chapter that Robin Hood did any thieving. So the Prince of Thieves was not hardly a thief in that book.
Well, neither was a bandit of Sherwood a bandit.
This is true. That is at least following our theme here. We'll see if the film adaptation changes that at all. Also, I was just curious, Morgan Freeman was born in 1937, so he would have been 11 years old when this film came out. He could have seen it. He could have been in it. Could have a cameo role in this Prince of Thieves, but I somehow doubt it.
Unlikely.
So we will pause our recording now, get our popcorn popped, watch the film. If you want to watch it yourself, you can find the DVD. I hate to admit I found it on Amazon. It was, as Rick said, in a DVD box set with 5 other films, 4 of which are Robin Hood adaptations, and one is called The Black Arrow, which is based on a Robert Louis Stevenson story. And then we will resume our recording, give our thoughts about the film. At that point, it will no longer be spoiler-free.
The name of the collection was called, The Origins of Robin Hood?
Robin Hood Origins.
Robin Hood Origins. In case anybody wants to find it.
All right. See you after the film.
The film opens with Maid Marian and her brother, Sir Alan Clare, riding through the forest. An assassination attempt on the pair is foiled by Robin Hood. Robin then befriends Marian and Sir Alan when he learns that they are friends of King Richard, to whom Robin is loyal. Robin then invites them to the home of his foster parents. While they dine with the old couple, the assassin from earlier marshals his compatriots for an assault on the house, although not before Friar Tuck happens along and invites himself in to dinner. Robin and his allies successfully defend the house, and it is revealed that the attackers come from Nottingham, where Baron Fitzalwyn wishes to do away with Sir Alan, who is betrothed to the Baron's daughter. The Baron, having decided his fortunes are best served by instead marrying his daughter, the Lady Christabel, to Lord Tristram, a wealthy ally of Prince John. Robin and Sir Alan, along with Little John, Will Scarlet, and Friar Tuck, infiltrate Nottingham Castle to help the Lady Christabel escape from her father and Lord Tristram. Hijinks ensue. With the aid of Christabel's handmaiden Maud, they're all able to escape the castle. Until they don't. Both Marian and Christabel end up captured, and a hostage exchange, Robin for Marian, is arranged. The villains, however, are villainous, and intend to simply execute Robin and force Marian into another arranged marriage. Will Scarlet and Little John rescue Robin, and many swashes are buckled as the trio fights their way through a castle full of Norman knights and soldiers. But there's still a pair of forced marriages to interrupt, and in a twist on the classic final duel, there are dual duels, with Robin and Sir Alan simultaneously fighting the lords who had been forcing Marian and Christabel into matrimony. Our heroes are victorious, and there are weddings for all. But instead of a happily ever after, the men immediately leave their new brides to go help King Richard win his throne back from Prince John, and thus the movie ends.
And we are back from watching Prince of Thieves from 1948, inspired by the Alexandre Dumas Prince of Thieves novel. As mentioned previously, that had originally been an adaptation of the Pierce Egan novel from 1840. I thought it was a really fun film. What did you guys think?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I liked it.
It was a very fun film. It was entertaining, but it was barely a Robin Hood film.
I would say it was solidly a Robin Hood film, just a very different one, and I actually really enjoyed that. I found it refreshing to not be getting sort of the same tale that you might expect to see. That was one of my complaints about The Bandit of Sherwood Forest, how it felt like it was just telling the same story, just with slightly different characters. But this was still Robin Hood in some ways. I mean, I suppose, and you're also right, though. It has some issues in terms of Robin Hood being the Prince of Thieves,
Right.
robbing from the rich, giving to the poor. Those elements were not there. We'll get to that a little bit more later on with our questions.
I think there was nothing that really established this character, who had the name of Robin Hood, has the legendary Robin Hood. He was just a guy with that name, and this was what happened that week. It wasn't like he's the real outlaw. There's no sense of him as being established as an outlaw. There's no real sense of him as being the hero to the downtrodden. It's just one little side story. I'm going to disagree with you. Even if you name it, even if it's named Robin Hood, and there's other characters that all fit the whole genre, I didn't think that was Robin Hood.
Well, I think that on a certain level, you're right in that you could have easily swapped Robin out for kind of a generic protagonist in the same setting for parts of it. But I do definitely think that they're at the beginning they do establish that he's trying to rob travelers. Later on, there's mention of taking a travel tax of sorts.
Well, I mean, they told a story, and it was an interesting story. But as far as I'm concerned, it's just a little corollary. But that's I don't really think that was Robin Hood. That was some guy who had that name and wanted to, he's set up with a woman named Maid Marian, but it's not, not the same. It's just a woman who shows up from France whose name happens to be Marian, and he marries her at the end. But man, that comes out of nowhere.
I'm going to solidly disagree. It's really important to the plot that they're outside of the normal structures of society, they're outside of that noble framework, that he has this band of merry men. It's important multiple times throughout the film that he has these bandits helping him with their plots to infiltrate the castle.
Mm-hmm.
It is established early on when the noblemen inside Nottingham Castle first come across him. They say, "Oh, this is Robin Hood," and they already have a grievance with him. So one of the things this film does is it introduces us to a Robin Hood that's already established. He is already a known outlaw. He's already preyed upon these nobles. They already have a grudge with him. And that makes it very different from other Robin Hood tales we see where he gets established as Robin Hood.
Right.
But I think that's okay. I don't think we needed that.
I don't want to. I didn't have a problem with it. Like I said, I feel like there were parts of the Robin Hood trope there, absolutely, and I agree with you that it was important that he has this kind of band of bandits and everything. But they definitely were taking some liberties with the Robin Hood legend, especially as it's presented. For instance, one thing actually I did like is this is I think the first time we see Robin in a movie where he's not established as a noble. He's got foster parents who are commoners.
Mm-hmm. And that's interesting. That's unusual. And
that was interesting. You know, and that's where I kind of get into they played a little fast and loose, and I liked that. I genuinely liked that. And it did make it so that it felt like this could have been another bandit figure. But it being Robin Hood, I wasn't trying to say that he totally wasn't Robin Hood. I'm saying that, like, they did take some liberties with the tropes and some liberties with the character itself to the point of where you could have, in theory, swapped it out for kind of a generic bandit character. But it did work with Robin Hood. It worked really well.
Yeah, I don't think it's the best take on Robin Hood, but I felt it was Robin Hood.
And I don't... This doesn't strike me as a movie about Robin Hood either. Like,
that's what I said.
And that's okay.
Yeah. It's a movie with Robin Hood, not a movie about Robin Hood.
Although it's like a little side story.
Well, you can use Robin Hood and his characters and the band and the setting as a setting to tell a different story. And how else would you refer to this kind of setting? And the most easily describable and marketable term would be Robin Hood. You're not going to say, "Oh, this is the reign of Richard I, and there's some bandits." You can't market that. You gotta call it Robin Hood.
Except that I kind of still felt a little bit like he was not even the inspirational leader of this band. He was a nominal leader, but he didn't do really. He wasn't a very strong character in terms of the figure of Robin Hood that we were used to creating this whole group and being the singular leader of them. He was there, he did his job, but I found him really as a Robin Hood character rather unimpressive.
He was decidedly the leader of that band of outlaws, but I do get some of what you're saying. I think the actor didn't have a lot of charisma and a lot of presence, like you really want to see from a very solid Robin Hood figure.
Yeah.
And the actor wasn't bad, but he just wasn't great either.
Super stilted, super wooden.
Yeah.
Like when he delivers lines, it's like he's reading them. You know?
And I didn't see everybody else really looking up to him as their leader.
No, well, and as a matter of fact, kind of at one point, Will Scarlet and Little John, they go and they take the place of these guards, and they kind of have a little fun with them. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I feel this is a movie where the Robin Hood actor is maybe not the weakest part, but he's far from the strongest part of this movie. And he carries it enough to let the rest of the movie unfold and work.
It was an entertaining movie, and the rest of the story kind of all held together. But there is no way that I would call him, based on this movie, a Prince of Thieves.
No.
Yeah, no, that's
he's not a prince, and he's not even a thief.
No, I honestly, I mean, there's a grand total of 2 muggings in the entire movie, and he doesn't get money from either one of them.
Yeah,
let's give it to the poor.
Yeah, it at least does follow suit with the book in that way. Something that is different with the book, however, is that in the book, he's a teenager, still living at home with his parents, up until the end when there's like a time jump forward, which is when he's being established as the thief in Sherwood. And whereas this one does this jumping right in, and where he's already this leader of the band of outlaws.
What are you talking about? He was obviously only 17.
That was something very different from the book.
Yeah, but we're not critiquing the book.
No, I just wanted to bring that up in the context of how in both the book and the movie, the title Prince of Thieves is just one of these things that sounds good, but actually has no relation to what is going on.
Like Band of Sherwood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about this conflict over the women, and that's so much what is happening.
Yeah, that's the thing, is like there was a whole lot of, and some of this is a product of the period when the story is written, the period when the story is set, and of course when the period when the movie is made. The female characters, with one notable exception, are pretty passive.
Yeah, we'll talk about that.
Yeah, they're pretty Buttercup and the Princess Bride.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're non-characters.
It is an absolute fair criticism, but I don't think it's fair to blame the time period too much, just because, as you said, it's also Princess Buttercup. Decades later, the same thing is happening with the female characters in the films, where the evil lord is forcing them to wed them, and the hero has to come and rescue them from their enforced marriage. It's very much that same scenario.
It's the trope of the genre. And that's why I say, it's product of the time when it is set, the time when it is the book was written, the time.
Well, I'm just saying that it's a trope that continued far past this. And it's a trope that we'll see again in the other film that bears the same name that came out in 1991.
You ain't wrong.
So one thing I don't think we mentioned, though, was how hilarious the movie was.
It is funny. It is genuinely funny.
Yeah, the whole room was laughing out loud multiple times. Unlike The Bandit of Sherwood Forest, it was intentionally funny. Yeah. We were laughing with this movie, not at it.
There was absolutely multiple pieces of witty banter that 100% worked. Even coming from, the kind of stilted Robin Hood actor in a few other places. So I'm just going to say, honestly, for anyone listening, skip Bandit of Sherwood, but absolutely consider watching this movie. This movie was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We
referred to John Hall being stilted in his performance as Robin Hood, and I absolutely agree. We made the same complaint about Cornel Wilde in The Bandit of Sherwood Forest, but we also talked about how unlikable that character was in several ways. And this Robin Hood, while stilted, he isn't unlikable.
You don't really say, this is the man I want to protect me.
He's not super charismatic. He's no Errol Flynn.
He's not charismatic, but I will say that I thought that this Robin was, at least, you got a sense that he was at least a nice person.
Yeah.
Like unlike the Cornel Wilde one, like this one isn't talking about sexually assaulting anybody.
And he's not just randomly insulting other people.
Yeah, he's not randomly insulting anyone. He's not forcing himself on Marion or anything.
There's also no reason that you could see from this movie why Marion would suddenly just fall in love with him. There's no bonding. He doesn't do anything that really makes sense.
There was one instance of bonding. He taught her how to shoot an arrow once.
Yes.
And almost shot
brained Little John.
Down in the head. But that's a pretty meager contact to base a lifelong marriage to.
The romance with them was lacking. I think we're meant to assume that there was more development that happened off screen, but it's really not shown. It does.
They killed a major villain off screen, so
yeah, we'll get to that more later too. But yeah, you're right. It is not developed. It seemed like it came out of nowhere, really.
Or your expectations that Robin marries Marion, even though this is not the same Maid Marian that you know from other stories. This is some sister of some nobleman from France who was a colleague of Richard. She has no real backstory that fits the whole other tropes of Robin. She's just a pretty woman who comes along with the intended groom of this other woman who really, in many ways, is the surrogate for Maid Marian, the captive of the bad
Mm-hmm.
Norman, you know. So she comes out of nowhere. They apparently fall in love at first sight, but there's no development of that. And
I think I'm much more forgiving of there not being more reliance on the standard tropes. That Marion doesn't feel like the same Marion that you see in other movies doesn't bother me.
Oh, it didn't bother me. So one of the things that I did notice, we touched on this earlier, is that this is the first movie, I would say, I'm kind of discounting, I'm not counting Bandit of Sherwood because it wasn't really a Robin Hood movie. It wasn't about Robin Hood.
Right, it's a child of Robin Hood subgenre.
But this movie was the first one of the ones that we've watched so far that deviated significantly from the core kind of Ivanhoe, Robin Hood, you know. So here, Robin Hood is not a crusader. He's not a nobleman. He has no actual ties to Richard, other than just being a loyalist.
Prince John is mentioned, but not shown. He's not an active character.
Yeah, Guy of Gisborne is not in this movie.
There's no Guy of Gisborne. There's no Sheriff of Nottingham.
I thought Alwyn was supposed to be the Sheriff of Nottingham.
They referred to him as being the Baron, or I know in the
Lord of Nottingham.
Yeah, he's never referred to as being the sheriff.
I thought he was at the beginning, but I might be wrong. But so we're seeing some serious deviations from the previous established movie trope items of Robin. And on that level, this movie kind of forges its own way. And I actually kind of like that. It's interesting to see this kind of different take on Robin.
right,
For all of its weaknesses, and for all of its underdeveloped love story, I thought that was actually really interesting, and kind of playing with the expectations of the audience, because, you know, in 1948, this is only 10 years after the Errol Flynn, and you come into this, and as an adult, you probably have memories of the Errol Flynn when you're coming into this, and it's a different Robin Hood, better or worse.
but they still wanted to make a connection when they made this other totally different Marion, Lady Marion, to make it still kind of rubber stamp it. It's still kind of like the Errol Flynn one, because we still Marion and made Marion. You know, they brought in this other character. Yeah, I mean, I thought this was an interesting movie, a good movie, and even though it was a different story, they still wanted to make that kind of connection.
Yeah, and I'm fine with it.
And honestly, it doesn't feel that different. She's still a noblewoman. He still rescues her from some other terrible Norman knight. I mean, it's really not that different from other things we've seen.
Her capture was really kind of incidental. They didn't go to capture her. They went to capture the other woman, who the kind of Norman equivalent of the Sheriff of Nottingham wanted to marry. She was just ancillary. She was collateral beauty.
Really, the only thing that I felt distinguished her from other Maid Marians we've seen is that she wasn't active in any way.
No.
She didn't do anything that helped further the plot.
She was, in fact, I hate to say this word about, you know, any person. She was basically a prop. I mean, she was kind of a
and a minor one. She did help drive Robin to action, but it was action that was already being planned because there was the other Lady Christabel, who they were already planning on rescuing.
Right. Yeah.
She was extremely tertiary to everything that was going on. She wasn't a bad character for what we saw of her. There were some cute scenes, but she was extremely minor.
Yeah, there was basically no on-screen chemistry either. And
not enough time to develop it.
Not
certainly.
enough time to develop it, even if it had been there.
I think that actress had a lot of promise, and I think she had a pretty decent career after this film, too.
She was actually, I will say, in the scenes between her and Robin, she was at least trying. John Hall was the letdown there.
Yeah.
He was, dude.
You can only have so much chemistry with a piece of wood.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're wrong.
Good for you, dude.
Mm-hmm. So I think we might even need to add a section about costuming, because we needed to talk about it so much in Bandit of Sherwood, and almost everything that we said in that movie we could say about this one, with the addition of discussion of Robin Hood's bright red booties.
Holy crap, they were so distracting. So part of the reason that they stand out so much is that this movie was shot in Cinecolor, and it was not color corrected later, or at least not well color corrected later. I would say for the DVD release, probably just budget and everything. Mm-hmm. So what you get when you see this movie is the reds and the blues come through fairly strong. The reds especially, reds punch. In this,
they pop.
They pop. Greens not so much. So Robin has these. I mean, they are crimson. They are bright scarlet.
Yeah, he's got this brown jerkin, white shirt, these tights that you think are supposed to probably be green, but they're really kind of bluish because, as you were saying, green doesn't really show up with the Cinecolor. But then his boots are just incongruously red, and he wears them throughout the whole film.
Seriously, we're talking ruby slipper red. They are just bright. Like when you see him, that's the part of him that your eye first is drawn to.
Can we talk a little bit more about how incongruous Sherwood Forest is? I mean, for some of us who have lived in California, this was clearly Southern California scrub. This was like the parks around San Diego and Los Angeles. There was nothing in the rural settings that said England. It was all California.
The lack of green really hurt it too.
Yes,
and when it got green, it was kind of like olive green and
it was a very very brown, rolling lush green hills of England.
The English village that was pretty obviously at some point also probably a Mexican village. In a cowboy movie. The castle where they built I don't know if they built or borrowed a gate.
I think it might have been the same gate they used in The Bandit of Sherwood. I know there was a lot of set reuse in addition to all the costume reuse.
And then the interior castle sets, I will say, they looked good and they did not skimp on the props and set dressing. Like there was all right. There was a significant amount of actual set dressing.
It wasn't lavish and impressive like the Douglas Fairbanks movie or the Errol Flynn movie were, but it was fine.
It was just
it was.
Well, no, I mean, I'm thinking of for instance,
it wasn't distractingly cheap.
It wasn't distractingly cheap, and it wasn't distractingly sparse.
But Sherwood Forest was distractingly wrong.
Yeah. The forest was wrong, but for instance, I'm thinking of Lady Christabel's quarters. For instance, there was a little altar, there was a desk, there was a big bed. It was reasonably well dressed, and the other things they had. Obviously, there was a lot of costume recycling. I mean, we noted that the one guard guy had on the Sheriff of Nottingham's tunic from the Errol Flynn movie with its red and white battle axe.
And Baron Tristram was wearing some of Sir Guy of Gisborne's clothing.
Yeah, that amazingly bright red, and I think it's faded to a kind of an orangey in this film because it's been 10 years. But those bright reddish zigzags on the sleeves.
Well, it probably popped differently too with the Cinecolor.
Well, because remember this was Cinecolor, and the Adventures of Robin Hood was Technicolor, proper Technicolor. Right?
And Dad's right; they were definitely needed to spend more time with their location finding because while Southern California makes for a poor representation of England, there are at least some spots that are green enough and forested enough. You could have done better forest scenes.
Oh, yeah. I don't know what the budget of this movie was.
$400,000.
Which was an uptick. They actually got more money to make the film than this director and producer usually had for their productions.
And that's good. But even for the time, that's not a supremely high budget movie. But I will say, I think they made it work. Obviously they're limited by Southern California and locations that they can afford on that budget, but they made it work. There was a few good set pieces done, and a lot of set recycling, tremendous amount of set recycling, but it worked. Honestly,
Yeah, it wasn't flashy, impressive. None of the costumes looked especially good, but they didn't look bad.
Wait a second. Now, Little John was rocking those rhinestones.
Yeah, Little John had rhinestones.
That doesn't look good.
Baron Fitzallen had rhinestones.
Real little brass rivets of some size, but rhinestones, that looked really incongruous.
Seriously, audience, listeners, Little John had on this vest that looked like it had been gone at with a bedazzle.
He was look. It was disco action, Little John.
Disco action, Little John.
But yeah, he rocked it.
He rocked it. They put Will Scarlet in all scarlet, which was a little. Really, you're going to hide in the forest like that?
That was the only thing that outshone Robin Hood's boots.
And with that cinescope, it really popped too.
Yeah, seriously.
Everybody else is in these kind of muted blues and browns, and then bam,
And
bright
it
red
more
Will Scarlet.
reminded me of the Disney Robin Hood movie with Will Scarlet being a rooster.
Those English knights probably had red, green colorblindness.
Oh, that would have helped. Yeah, that was good tactic on his part there. All right, let's move on to some of our list of questions. The first one is, what was the most impressive feat of archery?
So I will say, actually, I noted this while we were watching this. They hired either a sharpshooter or a trick archer for at least some of the shots, which was nice to see, because you saw arrow fly into things. I didn't see a wire or anything. It looked like they properly hired it for at least some of the shots. There was a few of them where I'm pretty sure it was a wire.
I didn't think the archery was especially impressive, but the one thing that stood out was early. There's this guy in the forest who you would expect to be one of Robin Hood's crew, but he turns out that he's on the bad side. He's an informer for the Normans or whatever, and they shoot his arm.
Yeah.
And that puts him into a position where he ends up getting treated for it, and that helps him be an even better spy for the bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
And that, to me, that was the most important piece of archery. Whether it was impressive, overall, the archery was not a big part of this movie, but that one shot was the most important of archery.
I would say if we're looking at it from the context of story, if we're not looking at it from the technical perspective that I tend to lean on, which is, from what did the trick archer do, but from the point of the story, I thought that if we're putting in context of the story, I thought that was actually a fairly impressive shot.
Yeah.
To shoot a man's hand while it's on the bow that he's
Right.
drawing.
Mm-hmm.
That was the only impressive piece of archery to me in the whole movie.
Second most was Maid Marian and Robin shooting Little John's hat. Well, he's taking
And whether that was Robin trying to really be impressed Maid Marian or an accident that they didn't kill Little John.
I think it was an accident, and I think it's impressive that Robin, while making googly eyes at Marian, was able to have enough thought to not shoot his friend in the brain.
Anything to add, Theo?
I mean, I agree with, story-wise, shooting the hand, holding the bow. Mm-hmm. There was one shot, which was very clearly a nice one, where an arrow goes between two characters, or, there's only 2 feet of clearance between their heads, and you see that arrow fly between them and stick to the wall.
Oh, when he was nailing the sign to the tree?
Oh, I was thinking of when they were in the inn or the home of the foster parents.
Yeah.
And Robin has encountered the spy, and then some of the Englishmen are coming in and shooting through a window between their 2 heads.
It shot between Will Scarlet and Little John's head.
Yeah. No, that was a really good shot. Good call.
Yeah. It was a good shot.
Yeah, one of the things I'll say about this movie.
But not what they intended to do. They would have been happy to shoot
either
one of them in the head.
Technically impressive from the trick archer not hitting the actors.
Yeah.
This was a film that, unlike others, there was no archery contest or other points where archery was specifically being shown off. In some of the other films, like the Douglas Fairbanks, there was almost no archery we talked about, except for a scene that was really just kind of there to show off how, Robin's really good with the bow. Look, he's going to do something impressive now. And this film didn't have anything like that, with the exception of the scene with Maid Marian. Archery was there as a practical instrument of war. It was a tool. Mm-hmm. We saw several guards getting shot off of turrets and buildings. Was used in a sort of practical sense.
Yeah, there was a fair few people dying of archery in this
film. Yeah. And I would agree with Dad's assessment there about that one shot there at the beginning that was an impressive bit of archery being done there. As he was also saying, not the luscious, thickest, greenest Sherwood forest, but one could imagine it was still this forest landscape that it was supposed to be, and between trees, hitting the hand of the assassin from a distance. That's a pretty good shot.
And also, like he said, probably the most important archery shot of the whole story.
Absolutely,
From a story standpoint.
Because that just played out from that.
I don't know if that's that kind of... You said that in the Dumas book, he pins his hand to the bow with that shot. No, and as a storytelling tool, it worked really nicely.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That was important archery.
Like, whatever other criticisms we have about this movie, I felt like the story did flow, really.
For the most part.
Oh, yeah.
What was the best example of swashbuckling action?
Oh.
The only one I saw that I was impressed was like Robin Hood was losing that battle, and then he did this thing where he brought the banner down over a bunch of the Norman soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that was the only really cool bit of swashbuckling that I appreciated.
Oh, for me, it was the fight in the foster parents' home. They're defending this home from the Norman soldiers coming in, busting down doors and
coming in through windows.
Yeah, Robin, his foster dad, and Little John's girl, they're busting bar stools over the knights' heads.
Yeah, I thought there was a good bit of really solid swashbuckling action. I think my favorite, I really did like that opening assault on the foster parents' home, but I also really liked the sword fight that occurred later on in Nottingham Castle between Robin Hood and Baron Tristram, and they're going back and forth at the same time. Little John is fighting off 4 men. Will Scarlet comes literally swinging down a rope to help Little John. The Baron Fitzalan is there, like, trying to pull his sword out of his sheath.
Yeah, it was
like that whole sequence was really well done.
Yeah, that whole sequence was really well done. I'm going to say that, I really liked that whole sequence. I liked, knocking down the banner. There was a brief bit, and this kind of harkens back a little bit to one of the previous ones that you pointed out in one of the previous movies. There's a point where they're entering the castle, and they're climbing up the portcullis chain, and I don't know if it was a stuntman or John Hall himself, but Robin Hood just does that arm strength only. Just crawls up and he's not going slow. He is trucking it.
It was impressive.
It was impressive. I did also like, from a sword fighting standpoint, at the final sword fight, when Sir Alan is kind of in trouble and is pressed by
Sir Philip.
Sir Philip. Robin's like, "Don't worry, bro, I got you." Kind of kicks off his opponent and then stabs Sir Philip stabs between Alan and Philip and guts Philip. You see the sword come out the other side, covered in red.
Yeah.
Like that I thought was actually that was a fairly cool bit for whatever other shortcomings that sword fight had.
I mean, the only other good part I would say of that sword fight was Philip, after he pinned Alan, pulled out his dagger to get a finishing blow. That's a technique you'd actually use.
There were some unrealistic sword things in this, but they also showed that people being a little brutal.
Yeah.
Like that little bit. Why wouldn't you do that?
So, how about wittiest bit of banter?
My favorite was, I love you, Maud going, "I love you, Jeff," and Robin going, "I love you too, Jeff," while he reaches to the bars and strangles him.
Yes, so
it's just great.
So Robin Hood is imprisoned in Nottingham Castle. Maud, the handmaiden to Lady Christabel, is gone to rescue him. As she said earlier, it is such a waste of so much man to have him be imprisoned there.
She had all the best lines in this movie.
The head guard apparently has a bit of a thing for her and tries to kiss her when she arrives bringing food to the prisoner, and she says, no, not here in front of your men. So he dismisses the other men, and she sidles up next to him and says, "Oh, I love you, Geoffrey," and she has winked at Robin to let him know that, there's some plan going on, and she's positioned Geoffrey so that he's right by the bars. Robin grabs him, strangles him so they can get the keys, and while he does this, he says, "I love you too, Geoffrey."
It's so great. The whole room just laughed at that.
Well, my favorite was the part where they've captured this important note, and her father's. Come on, well, father can't read.
No, that was a good one too.
No, so
It's a good thing
somebody
father
else
can't
has to read it.
Yes.
But you've captured this for me, but father can't read
Yes.
it.
And there's a
Then-
whole little
so-
bit where the sheriff, like the Lord picks up the note. Her father picks up the note, and he's trying to make sense of it. So he hands it to another guy, and he can't read it. There's like you illiterate ass.
That was my favorite.
That was a
Yeah.
really
Well,
good
don't worry,
one.
father can't read.
Yeah, Lady Christabel has written a note about the plight that they're in, and her father storms in on her, finds that she has written this note, snatches it away from her. Maud gasps, and Christabel says, "Oh, thank goodness father can't read."
Yeah, so good.
Yeah, that was my favorite.
That was very good.
Yeah.
And also, how often do you see that? This kind of acknowledgement that there was a
Right.
lot of illiteracy in the
Yeah.
Middle Ages.
And you almost got a point later on where it's pretty clear, at least implied to me, that Robin couldn't read either. Because the notes get passed on. He's not reading them either.
Yeah, he gets told just to destroy it and he burns it.
Yeah, but there are other places where it seemed like he was illiterate too.
Mm.
Possibly.
It was clear Friar Tuck could read, and he was doing that for them
Yeah,
at one
right.
point.
Yeah.
No, that was actually surprisingly well done. It was a good bit. Theo, any other examples of wittiest banter?
Oh no, you already hit my favorites. I love you too, Jeff, and thank goodness Father can't read.
A couple of honorable mentions for Friar Tuck, such as when they're trying to make their escape from Nottingham Castle and some guards stop him, and he just indignantly tells them that it would be a sin to lay their hands on a man of the cloth, and they back away, and then as soon as he's around a corner, he hikes up his habit and starts running away.
I did also like when he gives up his cassock to Maud so that Robin can kind of sneak out, and he's there in his undershirt, and he's in a room surrounded by like hanging meats. There, he picks up a big.
Looks like a turkey leg.
It looks like a turkey leg. We won't get into that.
Shank of
But
lamb or
a
something.
big,
Yeah,
a big,
some mutton.
big chunk of meat, and he starts chowing on it. And then when Robin comes in, they change clothes and everything, and he comes back to Robin, and Robin's like gnawing on something, and he goes, "How could you eat at a time like this?"
Yeah, and then while they're making their escape, Robin is still chewing away.
He comes out of the room just.
Yeah, and again, genuinely funny. These were lines that were clearly intended as comedy, and they work. They were good, funny lines, and well delivered. Surprisingly well delivered for a film that didn't have especially good acting.
Yeah.
Well, not especially good acting in the main character, but a lot of the side people
Mhm.
were good, solid character actors.
And good comedic timing, to say the
Right,
least.
yeah.
But from that high point of wittiest banter, let's go to how robbed were the rich? On that scale of 1 to
You
10.
got the merriest man question first.
It's my podcast. I can ask the questions in whatever
Okay,
order I want.
All right.
So,
Rob were the
You
rich.
gave us a list.
Can I do a 0?
yeah, so, Theo, how robbed were the rich? On a scale of 1 to 10.
0.5.
Okay, 0.5.
He gave it back.
Robin Hood is a champion of the oppressed. You know?
There was a
He
point
robbed
where-
somebody and then he gave the money back. It's true.
There was a point where he considered, should I rob you? And said, well, no, I like you, so I'll give it back. Yeah, it's pretty close to 0.
All right,
This
Rick.
was not a Prince
Also,
of Thieves.
I'll give it a 0.1 because he did try. In the very first start of the movie, but then he gave it back. Like Theo said.
I'm gonna give it a 1 because they did establish that they were setting up this tax on the road for travelers, for merchants, and made a point of saying how farmers and bondsmen would be exempt from this. How they weren't stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. They were specifically not stealing from the poor.
There's a joke in there I was about to make about politics, but I won't.
Yeah, so there was at least that like token acknowledgement that we're on the side of the people, but it was very weak, and it was definitely not the crux of the film, and not what you would hope to see from the Prince of Thieves.
Right.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, so as a Robin Hood thing that you were expecting to see, scored the lowest we've seen, even lower than The Band of Sherwood Forest, which also did not do well in this ranking.
Well, and then that's kind of where we get to the point of where, like, that's one of the sides where, yes, he's Robin Hood, but did he have to be? Because that's one of the tropes that just got kind of dropped.
Right.
Mhm.
And that's what I'm saying. It was not really, to me, the quintessential Robin Hood. It
Oh,
was-
yeah. No. You wouldn't consider this a quintessential Robin Hood. You wouldn't consider this an iconic Robin Hood.
No.
Like, maybe
But I'm okay with it as a Robin Hood.
Yeah, and as a Robin Hood movie, it was fine.
maybe there could have been some extra content or shots or planned shots or
This was
scripts
just-
written
Not on
for
this
it.
budget.
What he did
Well, they could have had something planned. This movie was only 70 minutes long, and so it was definitely on the shorter side.
Yeah, that's
Maybe
only an hour.
there
and
were
10
some loftier goals to include more of that. Who knows?
Well, but from what that is saying, the source material
Oh.
doesn't really have that.
Oh, it doesn't.
So,
Oh, never
you
mind
know, on that level, it's an excellent adaptation.
then.
This is true. Yeah, and that is a thing worth considering, that this is an adaptation of a novel, not an adaptation of earlier legends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, of course, the novel, as mentioned, is an adaptation of another novel, which was itself an adaptation of the earlier legend. All right, now, who wins the Merriest Man Award? This is the character, aside from Robin Hood, that you would most want as a member of your outlaw gang, and why?
I mean, hands down, I think we all agree.
Okay, 3, 2, 1. Everybody say the name. 3, 2, 1.
Maud.
Yeah, Maud the Handmaiden. Absolutely. And I was hoping that would be the case after reading the novel. She would be my clear pick from the novel, and I'm so thrilled that that was also the clear choice of the movie.
Absolutely. She was a great character, strong. She was the star of the movie.
The cast and actress who sold it, who played it to the friggin' gallery. And she worked, she was smart, she was witty, she delivered multiple excellent lines of banter.
Mhm.
She was also not a wilting flower like Marion. She at one point was running around with a sword, was ready to freaking shoot
Yeah,
people.
in the
Yeah.
assault on Nottingham Castle, she was there literally at the head of the charge into the castle,
Right.
had a sword, swinging at people, but then also being compassionate, tending to the fallen Will Scarlet.
Yeah.
Fallen, quote unquote.
Yes. He was playing possum a little.
At the beginning, it was going to look like it was going to be Friar Tuck, the way he just happily joined in on the defense of the foster parents' home and all of his funny little shenanigans with hiking up his loins and running away. And,
Friar Tuck definitely deserves an honorable mention.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which is seems to be what keeps happening with Friar Tuck
Right.
in these Splitting Arrow episodes. I think every single film he's gotten some kind of honorable mention, but hasn't been the standout yet.
What's curious, though, is that he doesn't even really kind of come in to the Band of Merry Men as Friar Tuck. He's just some friar that they find, and he signs on just as a matter of fact. He's not really indoctrinated into the group. He's not somebody who's
Mhm.
been there, like in the other movies where he does the thing on the bridge and, you know, and has a real character development. He comes like, he just shows up. And once he shows up, he's really part of the crew. But there's not this rite of passage
Yeah.
that there is in the other movies. So, I mean, we love him. He did good. But
Is he ever actually named as Friar Tuck?
no.
I don't think he's actually ever named.
I thought he introduced himself as Friar Tuck when he
I
walked
think
in
he
the door
just-
with his donkey.
I thought he just introduced himself as a friar.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, he definitely wins props for, like, he shows up at these people's
Yeah.
house and just walks in with his donkey in tow
Into their dining
into
room,
their dining room.
sits down at the table, helps himself to a huge serving of meat,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and
He's
says,
a
"Bless
great-
you, my good neighbors."
Yeah. And
He's
then-
a great character in this movie.
yeah, and that's why, like, really up until Maud showed up, he was a strong contender, but
Yeah.
honestly, I will say this. This movie is worth watching just for Maud.
Yeah.
Uh,
And Little John and Will Scarlet. They're
Also
into
rare.
their- No L on it there. I mean, they're, you know,
Mhm.
so.
But the scene with Will Scarlet and Little John when they take the place of the guards who are supposed to be taking Robin Hood captive,
Yeah.
and he doesn't know that they've done this,
Yeah.
and they're just kind of snickering because Robin doesn't realize it's them at first. That was pretty cute. I liked it.
That was cute. Yes.
Although, as they were disguised, sometimes they got mixed up because they had the same little bobs, but they were underneath helmets and
They basically had the same beard.
the same
Yeah.
beard, same build.
Little John was a little bit taller, but it's
Not
hard
by
to.
much.
But when you're getting
But not by
shots
much,
of
yeah.
one doing a fight and then the other doing a fight,
Yeah, you couldn't tell.
I couldn't
Like-
tell which
Like, I
one was which.
really wish that in the... this is actually one thing, is in the sword fight in Nottingham Castle, I really wish they'd done something to differentiate those two, because honestly, it's
Have
kind
one
of
of
tough.
them take their hat off.
Yeah, and differentiate them from the other guards who they were
Right.
wearing the same
Yeah.
uniforms
Yeah.
as.
Same uniform.
Because they snuck in disguised as guards, and it was really tough to tell.
Yeah, even if it was just one of them had his helmet removed, would have helped.
Yeah.
Okay, this gets us through that list of questions. Low points, and there definitely are some low points, some that we've only barely even touched on.
But we talked about the sets, and that you didn't really feel like you were in Sherwood Forest.
Mhm.
That was all kind of cheesy, and the guards' costumes I thought were kind of cheesy, and the guards walking around with halberds on the ramparts. What are they going to do with a halberd on the ramparts? They should have a bow and arrow, or it's just like some of those aspects were kind of cheesy.
I agree, this was very much not an immersive film-going experience.
Yeah.
Low point for me, honestly, John Hall's performance. It was really just not good. He has no charisma.
Right.
He delivers every line basically flat and the same intonation, and he's marginally more likable than Cornel Wilde, but not by
Marginally.
much. Not by much.
Well, he certainly wasn't a jerk like like Robert.
But he didn't
was.
really enthuse you about
No.
anything.
I never felt inspired. Like he delivers this whole speech about how he's protecting Sherwood Forest from Richard, and it's just like it's like okay. It's like he's reading off of a card, like, oh yeah, this is why I'm here.
Yeah.
He did not. That was a serious low point, and I really wish they'd had somebody who was just a little stronger, a little more
Yeah.
emphatic. Who could
You
sell
need
it.
like a better actor.
A better actor, or maybe he's a fine actor. He was phoning it in because this was to pay the rent. But I don't know. I don't know John Hall's career. I don't know that I've ever seen anything with him. That for me was the one that was the continual kind of low point. Was Robin Hood himself?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think in general, most of the characters just needed a little bit more development. We didn't get a lot of who their characters were, why they were. We mentioned the lack of real romance between Robin and
Right.
Marion.
Or
We
even-
have our other kind of couple, Sir Alan Clare and Lady Christabel, and it just leans on the fact that they have a pre-established romance. They were engaged 5 years ago, and now they're reuniting, but we don't see them together very much. We don't know why they're in love, what they like about each other.
Well,
Marion and
And she
Christabel
was-
are both very underdeveloped characters in general.
And Christabel seemed like almost ready to just capitulate and marry the other jerk. Okay.
I didn't get that impression.
No, I kind of did. It was like,
no, she didn't want to. I mean, she at one point goes to her father and is like, I don't want to. I'm betrothed to this other guy, and I like him a lot better. And I will
And
say that
she
I thought,
actively ran away.
and
She's
I
like,
thought
we've got
that-
a secret passage. I'm
and
getting out of here.
and I thought that Alan and Christabel
Yeah.
at least had some on-screen chemistry.
Oh, yeah.
There was at least a little bit there. Was it Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland? No, but it was at least something, and it was more believable than the chemistry between Robin and Marion for all 10 seconds that was on screen.
The actors were fine. It was just, like I said, underdeveloped.
One of my low points, or one of the spots I thought was a low point, was also a little comedic, was the finale with the fight.
Yeah.
Robin and Alan fighting their respective partners. Sir Alan's sparring partner's been dispatched by Robin, and Alan's just kind of walking away. He's got a bloody arm, and you still hear the sound of Robin fighting our not Guy of Gisborne. I can't.
Baron Tristram.
Tristram. I don't know. I always forget that. And then the fighting stops. Then you just stop hearing the noise. And then Robin walks in. He doesn't even have his sword either. He just walks in like, I am here now.
Yeah, dispatching the film's lead villain off screen. I was going to have to mention that as my biggest low point.
Bad.
They sort of established a kind of cool setup that I was looking forward to, because a lot of the other fight scenes have been pretty good. Like we mentioned, that assault on the foster parents' home, the earlier battle in Nottingham Castle, and then the wedding gets interrupted, and there's going to be this sort of double dueling situation with Sir Alan and Robin fighting the villains, Sir Philip and Baron Tristram. But then it's not very well done. The choreographed combat is pretty weak, and then just utterly fizzles, like Theo was just mentioning, where one villain we see get dispatched, and that was the
high point of that entire fight.
Right, and you mentioned that as one of your favorite moments, and it was good, but then you're expecting to see this epic climactic duel between our main villain, the one who is going to be marrying Lady Christabel, and who had been the kind of driving force of the villain's action throughout, the most forceful personality amongst all the villains. And then nothing. We cut away from that fight, and then Robin just walks back later. That's fine. Like, you almost think, like, I don't know, they paid each other off in some way. It was so weird.
The other guy's just got what looks like a flesh wound, and he doesn't go and rescue Robin. I mean, just like...
Yeah, he just walked away.
I found the entire ending of this movie kind of disappointing.
Yeah.
Not so much that I felt like it really ruined the movie, but like, so you have that where the main villain, the primary driving villain is killed off screen. Then you have a wedding, which is kind of a whatever, and especially since you've got the utterly unchemistry Mary and Robin Hood wedding. It was actually more interesting when Maud is like, "Hey, Will, get over here!" And they get married.
Yeah, fire talk. Quick, marry us also. It was a very cute and funny scene,
yes,
but it didn't work great from a story and character.
Partially because they hadn't really developed that. But then they put on this little bit where a messenger shows up, who's obviously on John's side, because he refers to Richard the Pretender, that, Richard is back in England, and then Robin Hood and his merry men just ride off to go fight with Richard. And it was just like, didn't need to be
Who was
there.
Richard fighting? Yeah, it was like, that was like, came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And it wasn't resolved. It wasn't really part of the story. You don't know. So what? Well, we're not doing anything with that. Richard isn't here. These were not really the antagonists of Richard, and it's just an excuse to leave your new wife.
Well, so in the movie's defense, they did establish much earlier about how these evil noblemen were specifically toasting to Prince John, and that they were on Prince John's side. So there was, and as well as the very strong connection between Sir Alan Clare and Sir Richard, and that was why Robin gave Sir Alan's money back, because, I'm loyal to the king and you're a friend with the king. So it wasn't totally out of nowhere, but it was totally irrelevant to this story.
Yeah, that's my point is that, it's the connection with Richard there is that part I didn't have a problem with. My problem was that it was so tacked on. Yeah. Like, it did, like, make the movie 2 minutes shorter.
It felt like they didn't know how to end the movie, and I think it was mostly
end on a wedding.
Yeah, I think it was mostly intended to be funny.
Yeah.
And it was. Having Prince John's page show up and be like, Prince John needs loyal people to come and fight for him. And they're like, screw that guy. If he needs somebody to fight for him, let's go fight for the guy who he's fighting against, And then they, kiss their 3 new brides and ride off. And it was not as funny as other bits in the movie, but I think that was its intention.
To me, it was just didn't work. It was just like, where the hell did that come from?
It felt like they put it in to hit the trope point.
Yeah.
Robin fights for Richard. And Richard comes back and Robin fights for Richard.
Yeah. But that was so poorly developed, I don't think that it came off that way.
Those parts are low points of this movie. And it's a shame, because the movie is utterly and almost completely enjoyable up until then. With a few points that we've discussed. but just and the ending isn't, like I said, it's not, crap, why did they totally botch it that way? It's just kind of like, really? Okay.
Yeah, kind of a letdown.
Yeah.
More than anything. Other low point I wanted to mention, just because there was so much of it, there was a lot of very poorly choreographed and filmed stage stabbing with people very clearly getting, a sword run through to the left of them and then feeling over. It looked really fake.
The sword comes through and it's not bloody. It's just obviously been
it looked.
Thieves Guild.
I would say worse than Thieves Guild. Thieves Guild. This is a reference to the Ren Fair troupe that I used to work with back when I was in college. Shout out to the Thieves Guild players. Our fighting quality was better than what was in this movie. I'm incredibly proud of the work I did with them, incredibly proud of the work that I still see them doing.
Yeah, they were better than this movie.
Yeah.
I've never seen them, but I'm assuming they were better than
It's true. We did not actually stab one another and get blood on our swords.
But,
and that was also live
production,
theater.
It would not be an unreasonable thing to see some fake blood on a sword that presumably is just passed through a body.
Yeah, it felt really poorly edited, poorly choreographed. Just the cinematography, like even just better angles would have helped some of those. And it wouldn't have bugged me so much if it wasn't so consistent. There was a lot of it.
Right.
And it looked fake every time.
They didn't want to get ketchup on their costumes that they were in.
Yeah, that's true. They were just borrowing these costumes.
We'll lose our deposit if you get it on there. Come on.
All right. Any other high points or qualities that you want to mention?
I was surprised to see a sword break.
Yeah, that was cool. That was a good moment.
That was a good moment. Yeah.
Robin Hood, in that Nottingham castle battle that we mentioned at one point, is swinging at the villain and instead hits a banister on the stone stairwell and his sword shatters.
And at that point he has to be improvised, and that's when he also does the thing with dumping the whole big banner on a troop of Norman guards, and that saves a whole lot of the trouble there. It was, my sword is broke, so I'll just use this tapestry.
And he totally chucked it at that dude's face.
Oh yeah, that's right. He
wow.
yeeted that thing.
I mean, high points. Like I said, this movie 100% worth the hour and 10 minutes to watch.
Yeah, it's a short film, but entertaining enough for that time. Absolutely.
Pop some popcorn. Watch it with people you like. You'll have a good time.
Drink some whiskey.
Yeah, don't expect high cinema. Yeah. Don't expect lavish
maybe
quality.
Maybe not a diamond in the rough, but definitely like a cubic zirconia.
It's worth it just for Maud.
It is worth it just for Maud. Well, and Friar Tuck. Yeah, I mean, this movie is not high cinema, but it absolutely was fun. Genuinely comedic moments that worked and delivered well and were meant to be comedic. And fun was had by all.
We watched the film with a room full of people on a great big projector and screen that Rick brought, and which was fun. I've gotten so used to watching these movies just on a little computer screen or something like that. This was a nice change of pace.
Yeah. Once we got all the bugs worked out, there was good sound too.
It's too bad. Yeah, too bad it wasn't a better spectacle of a film, because it is not a spectacle of a film. It's not great art, but it is very fun. The action sequences never are jaw-droppingly great, but most of them are pretty consistently good.
And it doesn't hurt your opinion of Robin Hood. This was just not his greatest moments.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a fair assessment too. All right, Rick, Theo, Dad, thanks for joining me for 1948's Prince of Thieves.
Thanks for making us watch.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, this was fun.
Thank you for coming to this lovely house on Chicotea Island in Virginia. So, are we done?
I think we're done.
Thank you for engaging us in this.
All right, thanks for joining us here in the Greenwood.
My thanks again to Richard Hopkins-Lutz, Theo Papke, and Roger Papke for joining me for this special episode of Splitting Arrows. And, of course, my thanks also to all of our generous backers on Patreon who make these episodes possible. If you would like to help out for as little as $1 per episode, you can go to patreon.com/IntoGreenwood. There you'll get early access to the episodes, a few extra audio clips, and other rewards as well. If you're interested in helping out, but don't want to give a recurring donation, you can also go to ko-fi.com/intogreenwood. That's ko-fi.com/intogreenwood. And of course, what would really help is just telling your friends about the show. Anybody you know who might be interested in old movies, Robin Hood lore, or any of the other things that we happen to discuss on the podcast. And if you'd like to find us on social media, we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all with the handle @IntoGreenwood. Into the Greenwood is produced and edited by me, Thaddeus Papke. Our theme music is by Plastic 3. Thank you for taking some time to join us once again.
I still don't have a good sign off.
BC, yeah. You need a good sign off. You need
I really do.
Fun. What's a good sign off? That'd be Robin Hood related.
Next time in the woods. I don't know.
Till next time in the Greenwood.
Till next time in the Greenwood.
Eat your veggies.